So welcome to the BITR Lightning Talks. Now in this session we've got a couple of software professionals who are going to be speaking on a subject that they're passionate about with a 5-minute time limit. So we're going to speed through each of them, 5 minutes max per person, and you actually will be able to vote for your favorite one by just checking the right hand side of the screen there. So do have a keen listen, soak up the passion, and then get voting. So first up, we have got Ryan Greenhall from Gusto.
Welcome everyone. Leading high-performance teams can be hard work, especially for first-time managers. Thankfully, many have gone before us. You are definitely not alone. There are 5 areas identified by Google that are strong predictors of performance. In order of importance, number 1 is psychological safety. Being able to show up as your true self, being comfortable taking risks and exposing weakness without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status or career. So what happens when we don't have this? People don't speak up in critical moments, for example, disagreeing with leadership or sharing their ideas. People cover up mistakes, for example, production incidents go unreported, denying us an opportunity to improve. And people don't ask for help, which limits their performance and potential. So how can we foster? As a leader, don't blame when things go wrong. Admit your part in the mistake. Seek to understand what happened. Be vulnerable, open up about your own blind spots, and allow others to help you cover them. Treat failure as an opportunity to learn and be better. It's okay to make mistakes, less okay to make the same mistake multiple times. Ask lots of questions, be curious, admit you don't know things, and encourage dissent. Show people that you value their opinions. Encourage feedback by both asking for it and giving it regularly. And listen, don't shoot the messenger. Number 2 is dependability. When dependability is high, the team will be reliably fulfilling commitments. Lack of dependability will most likely manifest itself as inefficient end-to-end delivery, miscommitments, and reduced trust amongst team members. As a leader, you need to lead by example. If commitments aren't possible, you need to communicate this effectively and proactively to reset expectations. Ask for help and ensure you're able to do what you say you will. All these things reinforce trust. And these are all key behaviours that you can encourage all your team members to emulate. The vast majority of people come to work to do a great job. Therefore, focus on the system of work first, not individuals. Are the ways of working optimised for end-to-end delivery of product? Does the team have what it needs to deliver? You need to hold yourself and your team to a high standard. No excuses. Number 3, we have structure and clarity. When structure and clarity are high, team members have clear roles, goals, and plans. So what happens when we don't have this? Responsibilities can fall through the cracks, so things remain undone. Was I supposed to be doing that? I thought you were. Time is wasted establishing or re-establishing ways of working. And if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. So what can be helpful is having some form of team charter. This encapsulates what good looks like. So why does the team exist? What mission are we on? How are we going to measure success? And what are the various ways of working together? Short-term goals aligned to that broader mission can be expressed using objectives and key results, which are a clear statement of what we wish to achieve and how we will know when accomplished. And planning. We can break down that broader mission into a series of manageable objectives. These increase focus, build momentum, and allow incremental delivery. And stories are a great way to communicate those strategic plans, outlining a view of the potential journey the team will be embarking on to achieve that mission. Number 4, we have meaning. This is doing work that is meaningful to you personally. And without meaning, motivation can suffer. Why bother? Why are we here? Who cares? People will be less able to dig deep when inevitable challenges arrive. Meaning can be viewed through both an individual and a business product lens. From a product perspective, meaning can come through solving a customer problem, perhaps doing something that's never been achieved before. From a personal perspective, meaning can come through, let's say, financial security, supporting one's family, through to achieving mastery. To improve sense of meaning in the team, start with why. Why does the team exist? And share your personal meaning. What does this position mean for you? And encourage team members to reflect and share on their own meaning. Number 5, we have impact. Outcomes matter. Teams derive a great deal of satisfaction from delivering concrete outcomes. For example, 1 million app downloads, 2 million new subscribers. Without visibility of impact, morale and engagement can suffer. Without that visibility, how do you determine if you've succeeded? How do you know if you're doing a good job? And is the plan working? Make outcomes visible and part of the daily performance culture. For example, you could have dashboards showing revenue, profit, conversion, app downloads, subscribers. Review them regularly. Monthly can be a good cadence. And celebrate meaningful improvement. We've covered 5 factors that influence high performance teams: psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, and impact. What shape is your team?
Thanks, Ryan. To follow him, we've got Emily Hewitson from Sage.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm Emily, I'm a user researcher at Sage, and today I'll be talking through my lightning talk entitled Our Persona's Dead. Okay, so we have a lot to go through in our 5 minutes, so I thought I'd just start off with what are personas. So just in case we haven't had anyone who's used them before, a persona is used in user-centered design and is a character which is used to present your customers or users' thoughts and feelings about a specific product or specific values. They're rather infamous in the UX community with any client or even an in-house product design team. They're really a starting point of any work. They're a tool which can be used to refer back to and to ensure that you're designing with your customer in mind. So, are they dead? As with a lot of things in design and research and UX, methodologies are different. Techniques go through peaks and troughs, and they have their good points and their bad points. Personas are no different. There are individuals who'll say they're amazing and essential, where there's others that say they're unreliable. So we're quickly going to go through some of the good and the bad before coming to our conclusion. So, just in case you've never seen them before, I've put a couple of examples up just to remember what they look like. The major benefits of personas is that they're a focal point of reference for anyone during the research process. Do a great job of representing the customer by a name that can be slipped into conversation in that way that they provide consistency, ensuring that the whole team is talking about the same individual. They're really invaluable at helping to ensure the implementation of empathic design due to the way they look and the way that they can convey this real person, making it much easier to relate to and empathize with someone rather than trying to empathize with a bunch of random research findings. The real benefits of personas are that they represent a major group for your website or product. They express a focus on the major needs and expectations of your user groups. They also give a clear expectation of how they're likely to use the website or product. They really help in uncovering features and functionality, and they describe real people at the end of the day with real backgrounds, goals and values, although they are made up with information. However, personas can go wrong. So personas have the risk of being under-researched, meaning that they're just assumptions in a nice format, which can compound a lot of issues as you then have a whole team working on assumptions rather than actual information. They can be full of stereotypes and irrelevant information that doesn't really help you with your design or development process. They can be more of just a tick box exercise where someone wants to do UX and therefore it's not made with real information. You're not really finding anything new. It's not helping you with anything. Even when developed correctly, with research, there is the risk that they are developed as just part of a box ticking exercise, shoved in a drawer and never seen the light of day again. That can just be a compound issue that just doesn't really help. As more of these weaknesses emerged, personas and alternatives were kind of developed around them because individuals were disillusioned with personas and their use, but can see the value in having the representation of customers to work with. There are a lot of alternatives. My particular favorite is behavioral archetypes, which are really similar in that they display the wants and needs of your customers, but view them more as a group of people rather than a single individual. And this can really help your team to focus on group wants and needs rather than a specific person. But that's kind of getting away from the point of what we were talking about today. So a persona is dead. Looking at the positives and the negatives of personas, I wouldn't really say they're dead as such, more that they're zombies. They're mostly dead, but alive in a different way. So what I mean by that is that the traditional silo-created, draw-dwelling personas that are the staple of UX box ticking are indeed dead. However, the need for well-researched, well-used conversation starters that really drive who the customer is to the center of conversation is very much still alive. Therefore, this kind of hybrid persona and behavioral archetype zombie, which has been created, is probably more useful to our UX process going forward. So really, in summary, personas aren't dead. Just the way that we think about them and implement them in the future needs to change. Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the day listening to the conference and you've enjoyed my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Next up is Mark Jose from Scott Logic.
Hey everyone, welcome to Build It Right. This is my talk. It's all about the culture. I'm Mark Jose. I'm a technical principal at Scott Logic, and I'm going to caveat this talk a little bit, really, because as we all know, this conference was going to happen back in March, and that was way before the world was a different place. And I guess culture is one of those things that's probably changed a little bit. So I suspect where I wanted to start was with a description of the talk that I originally proposed back in March. So in the last few years, development culture has become more and more important in motivating teams to produce great solutions. I've had first-hand experience of this and would like to share some top tips to better team well-being throughout empowerment, collaboration, lots of buzzwords in there, but I'll make it fun. And I guess the problem we've got is this thing happened. So I think this talk's going to be a slightly different talk to what I originally planned. So I'm going to quickly summarize. I guess it's become more and more important. Culture has become more and more important. Motivation has become really important. And we're all there to produce great solutions. Definitely got first-hand experience of this now. Top tips. I'm not sure my top tips are really good at the moment. I've got some ideas, but none of my top tips that work in practice kind of work in this new world. And maybe I'll share them at a later date. Team well-being is very important, and empowerment and collaboration are still important. And making work fun is super important right now. I'd like to start really quickly with what I understand as culture, and I mean this is the dictionary definition of culture. And there's a few definitions in the dictionary. When I first wrote this talk, there were two. This one, the way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. Since then, actually, I've noticed a new one has popped up, and the ideas and ways of working that are typical for an organisation that affect how it does business and how its employees behave. Is a bit of an interesting business-related twist on the first idea. But actually, I would like to focus on this one as well, because culture can also be to breed and keep particular living things in order to get the substances they produce. And I'll say that again, to breed and keep particularly living things in order to get the substances they produce. And I guess a lot of people can relate to this. One other thing I want to point out on this slide, I don't know if anybody noticed, but there's 96 people in here, and the guy at the back with the big monitor is obviously the boss because everybody else is working on a small laptop screen. I'm going to quote a famous person, Mr. Spock in The Wrath of Khan. Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And I think it was put better by Jeremy Bentham, actually. It's the greatest good to which greatest number of people, which is the measure of the right and wrong. And actually, this tends to be the approach of business, is the sweeping generalization that we can do something that fits everybody, but people are individuals. And actually, what I really want to do now is move on to Maslow, who people aren't familiar with Maslow. People are motivated to achieve certain needs, and that some needs take precedence over others. Maslow's hierarchy of needs falls into 5 categories, basically physiological needs, so air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. I'd imagine if any business is actually denying people these, then that's more of a legal matter. Likewise, safety needs, personal security, employment, resources, health and property. And I don't really want to focus on these because businesses should be supporting people in these areas. Love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization, the desire to become the most that one can be. And that's the sort of things we want to foster with our employees. I'm going to ignore the first two, as I mentioned, and I've limited the list of the things that we can influence at work, I guess, in the other three categories. Let me come with these. I mean, friendship's an interesting one, because do you want to go to work to make friends? No, possibly not. You have probably friendship groups outside of work, but do you want to be friends with the people you work with? Yes, and we can influence that a little bit. Sense of connection. People want to feel connected to the environment they go to, and that's very, very important at the moment. People don't want to become isolated. Respect. I've lumped in status and recognition, because actually respect, status, recognition are interlinked and related. But most importantly, and I guess the most important thing from my view, is freedom. People want to be free in the role they're in, to do their own thing, and to free to be the person they want to be. And that brings me on to the last one, because I've had some nice pretty pictures for all of this stuff, but I don't have a picture for this. Desire to become the most that one can be. And a lot of the time we sandbox people. We put them into a box. Right, they're a technical person. Right, they're a people person. Right, they're a commercial person. But actually, desire to be the most that one can be has different meaning for every single person that we employ, and therefore we should consider that when we're talking about these things. That's been my 5-minute talk. Thank you very much.
And we love a good internal rivalry. So that was Mark from Scott Logic. Next up, we've got James Leftley, who is also from Scott Logic.
Hi, my name's James Leftley, and I'm a senior software developer at Scott Logic. Typically, when we think of the theatre, it's from the perspective of the audience, looking to the stage from a distance into the fourth wall, the metaphorical divider between the audience and the stage. However, there is a different angle shifting the perspective to the other side, behind the fourth wall. The auditorium now looks relatively small and distant. The stage and surrounding areas are part of the factory or machine that can be adapted and changed for every event. Here we can see the rigging and lighting structures rising high into the space above. There is a striking contrast between the grand, traditional auditorium for the audience and this functional, modern workspace for the cast and crew. I developed an interest in working in live events during my time at university, and spent a number of years leading and managing technical teams, including supporting successful productions in the North East and at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Through working at these live events, I've learnt a number of key lessons and skills which I think are transferable into my current role as a software developer. Some examples of these include the importance of understanding and managing risks, the benefits of rehearsals and how teamwork is key to any project or production. In productions, the creative and technical processes go hand in hand. It's important to understand the constraints you have in place and be able to adapt and work with the client or creative team to deliver an experience that they are truly happy with. While thinking about the links between software development and working within a technical events team, I thought back to one particular event that I managed, which demonstrated the importance of these skills and how to adapt when things go wrong. It was the opening night of an event with multiple stages, both indoors and outdoors, and a number of different performers. On the main indoor stage we had a big opening planned featuring aerial dancers suspended from above. If this wasn't challenging enough in a typical theatre, the event was taking place in a 900-year-old Norman castle, which was not designed like a modern theatre and did not have a suitable structure in place for the equipment we needed. We had to build a large structure from the ground up to support the aerial dancers, as well as the usual sound and lighting equipment. During the opening performance, one of the aerial dancers' costumes became dangerously entangled inside her suspended hoop, and she was unable to break free. Many people would assume that this could have been hard to anticipate and resolve without the audience knowing, but before designing the structure to support the dancers, as part of the planning for the event, we assessed the risks involved, including how to free the aerial dancers in an emergency. We considered lowering the supporting structure to the ground, but this risked disrupting the audience's experience. Ultimately, she was rescued by a member of the technical team who had to safely traverse across the supporting truss structure to release her safely. We built a shared understanding amongst the team of the risks, such as physical, financial and reputational risks, and constraints such as time, money and the environment we were working in. By considering these early and reviewing them frequently, we were able to focus on removing the constraints that we could change and that would hinder us from delivering and running the show in a safe manner. We rehearsed specific scenarios to help us understand the risks, mitigate the likelihood of these risks happening, and to build muscle memory in the team for how to react to minimise the risks if they did happen. We started slowly, just discussing theoretically amongst the team. Closer to the event, we rehearsed these physically, building confidence in our operation of the event. We understood that the health and safety of everyone involved was our top priority. This was reinforced directly before the event started when everyone was reminded to think safety first. So, when this happened, the whole team was able to make a plan and react really quickly with the dancer being rescued safely. Despite all of this going on in the background, I asked around and no one in the crowd below even noticed the dancer being taken down from the structure by a member of the technical team. So, with some forward planning, understanding the risks, removing key constraints, and rehearsing for different scenarios, the team resolved the issues calmly and the event carried on as if nothing had happened. All of these are skills I think can be directly linked to working as part of a software development team. I hope you found this lightning talk interesting, and thank you for listening.
Thanks to James and all our lightning talkers. Please don't forget, we've still got our poll here on the right hand side for your favourite lightning talk. Hi everyone, I'm Imafidon. I've been your host so far today, and so I'm excited to be letting go of my hosting responsibilities and sharing my keynote for today. So my topic is AI and the future of work, and this is one that I know is definitely important for us, especially as software professionals, as devs, as DevOps folks, to be considering and to be thinking about, especially as there's quite a big role that we're playing in what happens next and the future, not just of work, but of kind of wider society and in all that we're building and all that we're creating. So for a little bit of context, this is me so far. I grew up in East London, one of my favourite places on earth, and have always loved understanding how things work. So that little photo of me on the left-hand side there, I'm age 4 outside my parents' house that are renting in East London, with a bit of a cheeky expression on my face because I've probably broken something, taking something apart in the house, taking it apart to understand how it works so I can put it back together. I always talk about our VCR players, remember those? We had one in the house that, I couldn't believe that this black rectangular object was going into another black rectangular object and Lion King was showing up on the third one. And so I was always like, where did Timon and Pumbaa come from? And so I remember kind of taking it apart just to understand why it worked, how it worked, and then thinking, well, if we can get Timon and Pumbaa, what else can we get in there? Who else can we get involved as part of this? And so this was something that led me to have quite a unique childhood. I was one of these child prodigy people, did 2 GCSEs at 10, did an A-level in computing at 11, and ended up going up to Oxford to study maths and computer science and fully following along in that train of technical things. And so it was something that I've always loved. It's always been my thing. And so it's even more exciting now that we consider that so much of technology and so much of what we do ends up being ubiquitous. It's no longer something it's just for kind of labs and just tweaking and playing with, but it now has impact in kind of wider society and outside of ourselves. And this is something that I've ended up kind of dedicating quite big parts of my career to. So whether it's kind of my podcast, Women Tech Charge, talking about, how we're using technology to take charge, but also whether it's sitting on the red sofa or being featured across different parts of press, I've ended up talking quite a lot about technology, its place in society, and how it is that we come to the conclusions that we have, how it is we come to the technology that we have built, and then therefore what the impact is with kind of those initial inputs. And so something that has bothered me for a while, and I'm sure this will be something that's familiar with all of you, is this notion of who does the technology. who are the innovators and who creates. This is an image that I took a couple of years ago in a secondary school not far from where that photo was taken, actually, kind of across the road. It's a girls' state secondary school that we've got here in East London. And this was a science display that they had. And I'll leave it up for a little bit longer. But this is a display that they had of scientists. You know, this is the people that they were celebrating there for being scientists, engineers, innovators, and kind of folks who were the forefathers, and I think I can definitely use that word, of lots of the technology that we have today. Looking at that image, maybe looking at my face, you might see something interesting about the inventors, the innovators that have come before us. And I'll kind of make it a little bit bigger one more time, but you can see that they're all dead, they're all white, and they're all men. And nothing at all against anyone who is a dead white man who is participating in the conference today. But it's a bit of a warped view of the history that we've got, especially our technical history. That's just one side. You could argue that's the history. There's quite a lot of herstory as well that we have that we've ended up kind of forgetting and missing out on. If I kind of make this a little bit bigger, you can see we've got lots of folks who could have been a part of that display, should really be a part of our story of how we got here today, who we've had the erasure. We've decided that's not really the part of the story we want to tell. We almost want to minimize the achievements of these folks to the point that now we recognize everyone, or a lot of people on the previous slide, but not as many on this slide. So just to rattle through who these are, just so at least there's at least one thing that you take from this session, my keynote today. If we start with the very far right-hand side, that is a woman who looks like a Hollywood actress because she is a Hollywood actress. That's in fact Hedy Lamarr, and she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Betty Boop, it was kind of modelled on her, but she was also a keen co-inventor and physicist in her spare time, and co-invented frequency hopping spread spectrum technology, which I'm sure many of you recognize. If you don't, you will have heard of something called Wi-Fi before, Bluetooth. I definitely think it should be a thing that when you connect to Wi-Fi successfully, you're like, thank Hedy for that. Next to Hedy, we have Katherine Johnson there. Katherine Johnson, if any of you have seen the movie Hidden Figures, which you should definitely have a watch if you haven't, came out from 20th Century Fox a couple of years ago. She was a computer before the computers took the job. She did calculations for NASA as part of the Coloured Women's laboratory group there in the 1960s, and was brilliant at what she did. She was very instrumental in kind of a lot of the early missions that they had at NASA, and she sadly very recently passed away, but again another kind of foremother, I guess, if we could do, of a lot of what we're able to do today. Moving next to her left, we've got Stephanie Kwolek, who was a chemist in the 1960s who made a mistake one day in the lab, and haven't we all made mistakes before? She ended up, that mistake was inventing Kevlar, which is the material that makes bulletproof vests bulletproof. And then finally, on the very left, the biggest one, because she's always the biggest example for me of what erasure looks like. She is Marie-Sophie Germain, who was a mathematician in the 1700s. Then was a time when you couldn't really be female and study maths. So she ended up writing into university and doing it at a distance under a male alias. When she got her degree at the end, she kind of said, oh, there you go, folks. Also, I'm Marie-Sophie. And they were like, what? And so decided that even though she continued on being a mathematician, working in string theory and lots of cool stuff, they decided actually it wouldn't be proper to have her name alongside those of her contemporaries when they built the Eiffel Tower. So if you do get to go there and see it, you'll see kind of along the bottom rung, there are a series of names there, L'Hôpital, quite a few greats that we've got. She was one of their contemporaries, and they decided not to include her name alongside it. And so there are things like this that have meant that we've almost ended up being conditioned into thinking about who are the technologies, who are the people building the AI, who are the people building the future of work, and then not then considering the different types of folks that we had, the people that aren't dead white and male, but the women, the people of colour, the those with disabilities. There's all kinds of different folks, non-binary folks, who have been a part of this, and in not telling their stories, we've ended up having quite a warped view of what it is to be a technologist. So my day job is running a non-profit called STEMettes. We are supporting girls, young women, non-binary folks into STEM careers, STEM being the wider science, technology, engineering, and maths. Everything we do is free for them to attend. It's always fun, and they always get food, because who doesn't like free food? But we're all about showing them what's available, the choices, how amazing DevOps is, how brilliant it can be to be a software professional, and why this is somewhere that, we definitely need them to be a part of. And so this is why I'm giving this talk today. I think when we think about kind of the young women I'm encouraging, the folks that you're hiring in the next generation, the people that will take your seat when you're retiring and moving on, or even when you leave this job, I think it's really important for us to kind of think about what comes next. And this is something I've become obsessed with from running STEMettes. And so there are lots of other things I do, like being a trustee at the Institute for the Future of Work, kind of looking at what happens next, specifically in the workplace. Because we spend so much time at work, it's so influential for the rest of life, and it's actually where a lot of the technologies we're building are ending up being used and implemented. But I think if we think just a little bit wider, when we think about the future, I don't know what it is that comes to mind for many of you. This is a Guardians of the Galaxy-esque scenario, flying cars, something that looks a bit like the Burj Khalifa in the middle, kind of the future. I don't know if this is what you imagine. I know many of you may have seen the 1980 show Knight Rider, and may remember kind of looking at that and thinking, it's the future. There was a main character who would fight crime, would talk to his car, and his car would kind of hear what it was saying and understand it and kind of come back. And I don't know how many of you have fond memories of that, how many of you missed out on it. It is what it is. But even then, it's funny to think that not that far back, talking to inanimate objects seemed like such a futuristic, far off thing. And so when we talk about the future, when we talk about, what AI and what artificial intelligence has been able to do, there's lots of exciting things that we've been able to create that are taking us towards whatever view of the future it is that you may have, right? Whether it's things that have helped with, discovering antibiotics and kind of medical progression, whether it's in the legal sector and being able to use AI and other kind of elements, other different tech trends kind of wrapped up within that, to be able to help process maybe land registry records for someone like BLP, who are a big law firm that do a lot of kind of property cases. Whether it's the more recent examples we've seen of kind of DeepMind maybe being able to be able to play Brick Break and discover new strategies for playing a game, which, there of course are professional gamers. So if playing this game is your job, then you should be worried that this robot has taken your job. But there's even more of an extension now we're seeing into creativity. So this is an orchestra and choir singing a song that's been composed by Ava, which is the artificial intelligence virtual assistant, called Let's Make It Happen, I think, for the 125th anniversary of Luxembourg. And there's lots of music now that we listen to without realizing that has been generated by algorithms. Of course, there's legal implications as well with this, and this is do not pay, which certain audiences tend to really like when I talk about this, the kind of AI parking ticket lawyer that can automatically appeal your parking tickets. You just answer a couple of questions, you print, you sign, and you send. And when we think about AI, I think the thing that's the scariest part that people talk about is the kind of the robots that will marry our grandchildren and take our jobs. And we're making the steps in that direction, right? So there's AI and robots like Sophia, who is a citizen of Saudi Arabia already now, has been for a while, and kind of the lines are blurring, right? We're stepping towards this future in a way that it's not as distant as we may have initially thought. And I think especially as a software professional, you're kind of on the cusp, you're driving a lot of the things that are allowing that to happen. But I think it's really important for us to learn lessons from the past. We're not the first technologists. We're not the first generation of innovators, even though sometimes it can sound and feel like we are. There's lots that has gone ahead before us, lots of innovations and lots of things that have brought us to this point. And so there are lots of lessons learned and things that I think we should avoid repeating, mistakes I think we should avoid repeating going forward, that definitely starts with us as technology professionals. So 3 examples on this slide of kind of tech gone wrong, and there's a theme that we've got across all of this. So the first one is an image of me stood next to my mate John, who was the voice of Siri up until I think iOS version 8. If you had the male voice of Siri, this is the face of the voice that you were hearing. Of course, it wasn't John. You will know it wasn't John you were speaking to. His voice recognition engine, kind of all kinds of things, natural language processing going on there in the background. And yet it's something that, some of you will remember Ye Olde Siri. it's a bit rubbish, give me directions to Norwich. It'd say, did you ask for ice cream? You'd be like, no, Siri, it's nothing like what I just said. And it's only in the last couple of years that we've got to the point where, this technology is usable by enough people that's become commercially viable and has therefore become ubiquitous. I'm almost afraid of saying, Alexa, order toilet roll, just in case a load of you get toilet roll arriving in the next couple of days. Apologies in advance for that. But, it's something where, by not including the different types of voices that software might come up against, whether it was female voices, whether it was those with accents, whether it was those who were older and tend to speak slightly slower, it's meant that, there's a great video on YouTube, two Scots in a voice-activated elevator. Spoiler alert, they go nowhere. But it's a good example of actually by not including difference and building for difference, and even just women, they're quite a big part of the population. We end up building without them in mind so often, and considering that perspective, that it means that a lot of what we create kind of ends up not being useful or takes longer to be able to be useful. A second example, which I always love talking about at conferences, especially if there are rooms of people who have never heard this before, are periods. And this is another one that I think for me, it's not only frustrating because I know people that have had periods before, but I think it's also, it speaks volumes to what are we missing. So this is the example, it happens cyclically, keeps happening actually. You have Apple Health releasing, this thing to measure everything about your health, and forgetting that there's quite a big part of the population that do have periods every now and then, or the other fitness hardware company, rather large fitness hardware company, who a couple of years ago discovered the period for the first time ever and managed to build a feature that only lasted 10 days. And if you've ever spoken to someone that's ever has ever had a period, or ever met someone that's ever had a period, that kind of a 10-day stretch doesn't really mean much within a period. They kind of do what they want. And so it's crazy to think that you're able to build platforms like that. You're able to test for it. You're able to kind of do everything up to quite a big release without having either had a single woman or person that has periods in the room at any point, or without listening to them on something that's kind of been around for much longer than a lot of us and most of us have been. And so what else are we missing out on by not considering other? And the third example is that of seatbelts and airbags, which again is an engineering example. And it's one that I think frustrates me because it's been around for so long, but it's still there. We still have this thing where the initial engineers that worked on seatbelts and airbags managed to kill women and children because they haven't considered that they might be users of the cars and the safety devices that they developed. But even now, our safety standards are based on the 50th percentile male, which means that if you're not 50th percentile male, which I will never be 50th percentile male, I imagine there's lots of you that aren't 50th percentile male, because that's kind of the definition of 50th percentile. But if you've never, that it's being tested for that. So if you're not, that means that I probably never used the seatbelt correctly, because my body composition isn't that of a 50th percentile male. And so in terms of the physics and the engineering, it's kind of not really doing as much for me as it would be and would have done for 50th percentile male. And so we can take this a little bit further when we think of what we're developing, when we think of these tech trends, AI and the future of work. We can take it a bit further to say, what else are we missing? And what are the consequences of missing that? If we're building, security robots to patrol our offices, and we're in San Francisco, are we considering the fact that there's quite a big homeless population there? And so if we ended up cataloguing them rather than actually keeping our buildings secure, do we have their permission for that? Is that really the point of the security robot that we've built? Even with things like image recognition, when we've built this thing and we can see that, yes, those are skyscrapers, yes, those are airplanes, yes, those are cars, yes, those are bikes, no, they're not gorillas, but yes, that is a graduation. It's bad enough we've built that and we've got to that point, we've missed the testing or whatever else it might be. But, is the solution really to just remove gorillas as a tag? What are the implications of doing that when we consider kind of, no algorithm is an island, right? They're all built together. Some people use those libraries, they use those code bases. And so it's really important for us to consider all of this and, why are we building? What are we building? And by not being intentional and being vigilant, what are we creating that doesn't really need to exist? But actually, how can we do better, right? Do you really want to send someone to Twitter to learn things exclusively, let alone a bot? And kind of the examples abound. There's more. I have less time than I've got. I've got more examples than I've got time to go through. If I'm renewing my British passport, I don't want to necessarily have to give a medical reason why my mouth appears to be open just because my skin is dark. But even more so, the boundaries end up being blurred. So, being able to read body language is an essential human skill. It's also not necessarily a science. And there's all kinds of biases that you can end up considering or thinking about or building for in terms of how someone walks. What are the consequences of what we're creating? And this, of course, has been really well documented. It's something that I particularly have been looking at quite a lot with the Institute for the Future of Work that I'm a part of. And there's been quite a lot of papers. So if any of you are interested, then ifow.org is a great place to start. But, there's a lot of this for us to consider on the individual level, which is one thing. But then if we're working in companies, if we're building this, if we're thinking about the future of work, then at the firm level, there's just as much to consider. And then, of course, all of this has impact outside. So at a systems and society level, what are the implications of what we're creating and what we're building? And not just the big decisions that we're making, but the smaller decisions, in your code reviews, in your product roadmaps, in the way that you do what you're doing, what is happening next as a result of that. So 3 examples I wanted to take from some machine learning case studies that we've worked on recently, to talk a little bit more about the future of work kind of angle on this. And there's 3 of them that we've looked at and we've deep dived into around work, around hiring, around job advertising, and around talent management. And they're ones I definitely want you to think about and that we're definitely kind of working on proposals for. But, how do these things relate to what you're working on, what you're considering, what is the legacy, the impact that you want to have as a software professional? How can we think about building better and building more inclusively going forward? So there are 3 examples. The first one is proportionality. So this was a hiring system that a particular company, these are all case studies, these are real things that have happened that we've kind of written up and tried to obscure kind of who it was. So this is a hiring system that was trained on data sets that were built from social media profiles and customer ratings of existing employees. And this is something that, it seems fine enough, who does well already, who do we have here, what can we infer from their social media profiles, and how can we then kind of go forward with our hiring. And it was really interesting what ended up happening in building these data sets, in a way that seemed fair and kind of from the outside looked like it was going to be a recipe for success. If they're a successful employee now, why wouldn't we try and find more of them? Well, I think when we consider things like proportionality, which was what ended up happening in this example, these companies ended up not noticing or not realizing that the profiles of some demographic groups had a lot less information, right? And customers actually tended to prefer talking to workers who sounded like them or looked like them. And so that gave extra weight to particular words, particular adjectives, particular traits, which tended to be more kind of prevalent in male candidates. And so they ended up hiring more male candidates as a result of this, which kind of, I don't know that male equals success, as controversial as that sounds. I think there's other things that people might have. There's people that might be successful in a way that you've not yet been able to identify or have as part of your data set. Or there's people that might be successful in a way that your current hiring processes haven't been able to reflect. And so how do you make sure that kind of you're not building and you're not reinforcing a lot of these things as you look forward for your hiring? So that was the hiring example. Job advertising was the second one. And, especially if we're using social media platforms as well, we don't necessarily always know kind of what those measures for success are and the implications of those. So this was another case study that we looked at with targeted job advertising, right, which took a lot of inputs from social media about people's behaviors, about their clicking, their liking behavior, and tried to use those as proxies for characteristics that ended up being protected characteristics. And I think, there's definitely a lot in law about equality that we have already, but we need to also make sure that the more that we build and more that we create, we're not kind of building proxies and kind of sideways ways of trying to work out if someone's a woman and whether they're going to do well in something and whether they'll click on this job advert. And the knock-on effect of that was that then we ended up seeing women being getting adverts for jobs that were slightly lower paid, but also not getting adverts for particular types of jobs. So like software developer, for example, which only exacerbates the problem that we already have of underrepresentation in our industry. If the women aren't even being given the job roles and the adverts, then how do we expect them to be able to be a part of it? So this idea of causality and saying, do you know what, we know things aren't perfect now, so we want to use something slightly different rather than just click-through rates to make sure that we're, again, not having bad hiring practices. And the final one, which I think is the most worrying, is talent management. And this is one where, if you end up trying to combine various data sets about people that are already in your organization, and this was a retail example that we looked at, if we're looking at workplace chat, if you're looking at wristbands, if you're trying to do facial recognition and trying to predict behavior, that's one thing to maybe monitor your workforce, which is, it kind of is what it is. It's kind of not, but that's by the by. If you then use that to determine shifts, where people are working, when they're working, their pay and their promotion. If we look at even facial recognition examples I've just shown, you can see where actually we can then end up discriminating against people, in quite a big way, and unnecessarily so, in a way that then impacts their pay, their promotion, where they're working and when they're working. And it's quite impossible to tell which factors, again, are being weighted in that way, and to make sure that we stay within the law. So those are just 3 quick case studies. You can go out and kind of check the white paper in your own time. But I kind of wanted to leave you with 2 things to consider and 2 things to do to ensure that we use the AI, we use this whole 4th industrial revolution, but we use it to do better and improve the way things are, not to maintain the status quo or even take us backwards. And that we're able to do that not just for the future of work, but for the future of wider society. So the first thing is to make sure that you're intentionally including. And I say this because if you're not intentional about including those differences, then you will unintentionally exclude those people, which we saw in those 3 case studies, but it's just something we have across the way that we do business, that we build our dev teams and that we do our work. You have to be intentionally inclusive about who you have and about the kinds of decisions that you're making. And just 2 things to consider. If we look at the image on the left-hand side of this slide, I don't know whether you see a princess, an engineer. I don't know if you don't know what you're looking at. I'm not sure how many of you are actually, I'm just looking at a dude in a dress and a hard hat. But I think it's really important for us to consider what is it that we're looking for and how much are we aware of the fact that we'd almost end up trying to pattern match. Can I almost back to those dead white guys and be like, okay, this person's going to be a dead white guy. I'm sure they're going to be fine at this. So making sure that we're not doing that. But if we take the great example from the Invisible Women book, which I'd highly recommend all of you check out and read as part of your professional development, this is an example of someone who's a single parent. And we've got the stat just cut off at the top that in the US, more than 80% of single parents are women. In the UK, it's 90%, but it's not exclusively a gendered thing. This is someone who is a director at their company. They're also a single parent. And so when it comes to booking themselves in for a director's dinner that's coming up, most of the people that aren't single parents, have the typical traditional setup, whatever that means. And they were able to check themselves into the hotel next door to where the dinner was happening, all fine. The single parent, on the other hand, had to check with the babysitter and book the babysitter to be able to attend this dinner. And so we asked the question, what are the policies that you have at the moment? Is the hotel an allowable expense? Probably. I mean, it's touchy to talk about hotels now in a pandemic, but probably is. Is the babysitter an allowable expense? Possibly not. But they're both, that's what each person is needed to be able to access that space. It probably costs something similar. So why do we not? What are the norms that we've built our policies around? Which means that if someone's slightly different, they can't feel like they're included. But also it's in the small actions, which I think is the other thing we need to kind of keep in mind, especially as devs. Often you can think, this isn't me. This is too far away from what I'm doing. I'm just here for the code reviews. I'm just here to build good code. But actually, you're not just there to do that. You're not doing it on your own. And so it's quite important who you have around you and how you treat them and the sense of belonging that they're able to feel. And I always use this image on the left-hand side of this person representing the European Space Agency on one of their biggest days. This is the person that's turned up to represent them to talk about whatever mission to Mars or whatever it was. And this is what they've turned up in. And I always it's hard to see you. I can't see you, but I'm guessing I'm hoping many of you aren't wearing a shirt like this, even to just watch this pre-record. And so it's interesting to think, if you had to go and represent your company, what would you feel comfortable being able to wear in front of others, in front of the nation on breakfast TV, and kind of what are the small things that have happened, the small changes, the small interactions you've had that have meant that you now know what is tolerable and what's okay, and how your actions impact on others, and also the importance then of kind of being intentional with your actions. There's great resources we've got here in the UK, like the Tech Talent Charter, which is kind of a brilliant playbook of just actions that you can do to ensure you've got different types of folks in your team contributing to what you're doing. You've got tools like Textio that help you look beyond just saying you're looking for ninjas when you're hiring for technical roles, but looking at the kind of biases that you might have in job descriptions. And then you've got Better Allies, which is another great resource, but kind of knowing that it's the small actions, small intentional actions that allow people to feel included in your space. It's not necessarily just about the big initiatives and the big things. And then finally, and this is something that we're pushing for on a governmental level, we're at the Institute for the Future of Work, we've actually just put out a proposal for Algorithm Accountability for Algorithms Act, we call it AAA. But you actually need to be able to be intentional about auditing the systems that you are using and the ones that you're building. So we've actually advocated for the government saying, both the user and the creator need to be held accountable for the impact, whatever impact it might be, of the algorithms that you're using, especially in the workplace. And like I said, kind of on those 3 levels of for the individuals, for the workplace and the company itself, but also a system level. But it's going to be really important for us to make sure that, we're not just taking code bases that reinforce these things, but we are being really specific and being really vigilant to ensure that we are building for better and we're going in the right direction and we're not going backwards with our use of technology. So that was my keynote. That was AI in the future of work. I hope there's lots of things you've been able to think about and consider, some practical things to take back, but I'm hoping it's in the small actions. If you're intentional with being inclusive, you'll be heading in the right direction. And moving all of us, therefore, towards that future that we deserve, and where the status quo is better and where we don't end up building robots that accidentally kill us because we forgot about different types of people. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.